Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar this morning. I'm Owen Rose from Acteon, and I'm here with my colleagues Rebecca Trigg and Sarah Whiteman. So Sarah will be assisting us this morning. If you've got any sort of technical issues or challenges like that, then you can drop that into chat and Sarah will be able to pick that up and hopefully help out. But thank you very much for joining. We've actually just got a couple of minutes before we're going to start. And we're keen to get a bit of interaction this morning, get everybody involved. And there'll be opportunities during the webinar. We're keen to get your input. And we'd like to do that using chat. So just to kick us off and get everybody comfortable and in the mood and using chat, we've got some important choice questions here that we're going to work through. So here's the first one. Would you rather travel back in time to meet your ancestors or go into the future and meet your descendants? So we'd be just interested to know what you think. What would you choose based on this? So if you can pop your answers into chat just to get familiar with that, and we'll get that rolling. Rebecca, I don't know, what's your what would you be choosing?
I think I would probably meet my descendants, I think.
Yes.
Just because I feel like I know what their past looked like and what was happening. I've read all the history books. So I would be more interested in going into the future and meet my descendants, see if they looked anything like me.
Sue says future too scary. So she's going back into the past. It would be tempting, wouldn't it, to meet, I suppose, to meet people that you may have heard about or known in the past. I suppose it depends how far back you go, doesn't it? Because that might be quite scary as well. In many cases, yeah.
Cavemen.
Oh yeah, that's very sophisticated from James. Yeah, wants the best of both worlds. Go forward so you can go backwards. Okay, so just to everybody on the chat, so we do want people to participate. Just check that if you're keen to join in the chat, that you're sending your messages to everybody. So if you check in the bottom of the Zoom chat window, you should have the setting so that your messages are going to everyone and not just to the host and the panelists. Okay, so let's have another choice to make. Would you rather be super fast or super strong? Tricky, this one. Then arguably, which is more useful?
I think I'd go fast.
Me too, always, definitely.
Sarah's fast anyway. She runs marathons.
Yeah, Sarah already is.
No, that's long. I've never been speedy. I'd like to be Usain Bolt speedy.
So do you pop your practice super fast? There's always so much to do. Yeah, that's a challenge. Yeah, that's very important. Fast, but without the flat cap. Absolutely. Okay, so for people who are just joining, we're just passing the time, picking up a few challenging choice questions. So if you do want to join in and you want to use the chat, just make sure at the foot of the chat panel in Zoom that you're sending your messages to everyone. So if you just select that to make sure that you're sharing your messages. Great. Okay, well, we'll be starting the main webinar soon, but we probably ought to have one choice to contemplate. Would you rather sing like an opera star or cook like a gourmet chef? Possibly more useful to be able to cook like a gourmet chef. Possibly totally. More appreciated by the family, certainly.
Do a bit of both, maybe.
Yeah, my opera singing definitely wouldn't be appreciated around here.
My family would obviously say I already cook like a gourmet chef, so maybe I should choose the singing. I'm a terrible singer.
I once went to a lovely coffee bar in Soho where they actually combined both. So the food was fantastic, Italian coffee bar, fantastic food, delicious. But one of their waiters was also a sort of aspiring opera singer. And so by special invitation, when he was there, he would come out and let rip with an amazing aria into the restaurant, which was
awesome. It feels really authentically Italian, doesn't it?
Well, there's that famous Chinese Elvis restaurant in London as well, isn't there? Which is, very similar, but all good fun.
Great. Well, that's probably enough of these slightly frivolous choices. So let's move on and get the webinar started. Thanks again for you all joining today. But there is a link, really, because this morning we want to talk about choices made in the moment, and the behaviour choices that colleagues are making at work, and the impact that that's having for the organisation. So we'll come on to that a bit in a second, but just to introduce ourselves. So I'm Owen Rose, I'm a consultant and partner here at Acteon. I'm joined today by my colleague, Rebecca Trigg, who'll also be leading some of the webinar. And for those of you who haven't come across Acteon before, we are a communication and learning agency. We're based in Cambridge, and we work with clients of all shapes and sizes in a wide variety of sectors. We work in all sorts of for business needs. So we work in onboarding, compliance, leadership, change, all sorts of areas really. And we work across all sorts of media in the things that we deliver, as you'll see later on in the webinar. But at the core of what we do, we're about helping people to do the things that make them and their organizations more successful. So we're really in the business of influencing behavior, trying to get people to adopt positive behaviors. And that's what we want to talk about today. We want to share some of our insight and experience at doing that. I hope there'll be some interesting stuff in there, certainly some thought-provoking stuff, maybe some practical things that you might want to try out as well. So I'm going to kick off by just sort of setting the scene a bit and showing a little bit of our insight and the ways that we work. And then Rebecca's going to follow that up with a very practical case study from one of our larger clients, which will hopefully illustrate the kinds of things that I've been talking about in the first part of the webinar. Okay, so let's get started. So we talked about our focus really is about behavior and the behavior choices that people make. And okay, we had some frivolous choices early on, but you know, this is relevant to all of us really, about the choices that people make at work. So it might be choices people make when they're handling sensitive data or information. It might be choices colleagues work when they're using a technical process or a key piece of machinery. It might be the kind of behaviours and choices that people are using in a leadership setting, perhaps when they're coaching a colleague or something like that. And right across your organisation, it's the behaviour choices that colleagues are making in the moments that matter that are driving the performance of your organisation. And really for all of us, I guess, involved in kind of L&D and HR and so on, we're trying to influence those choices. We're trying to help people do the right things. And we might be doing that through, I suppose, the lens that's more familiar to us. So, you know, maybe it's through e-learning, maybe it's through video, maybe it's through a classroom training session or a webinar, maybe it's through a coaching program delivered on the LMS. All of these different tools and channels, all of these resources that we're investing, and ultimately we're trying to influence behavior choices. We're trying to influence what people actually do, because that, of course, is what underpins ultimate success and impact. So that might be, improved customer satisfaction. It might be things like improved productivity or efficiency or financial performance. It might be to do with improving things like colleague well-being. But ultimately, those things, those crucial impacts which the organization seeks, depend on what people are actually doing. But we also know, as L&D practitioners, HR people, it's really, really hard to influence human behavior, to change what people are doing, to get them to do new things, to get them to stop doing things that aren't particularly helpful. And the reason for that, fundamentally, is because we're dealing with humans. Our learners are humans, our audience are humans. And I think this quote, which actually comes from sort of the advertising guru, David Ogilvy, captures this really nicely. So in this quote, he was actually talking about customer research. So trying to ask customers, find out the things that they want and the things that they intend to do. And as he said, customers don't think how they act, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. And really, I guess what he's talking about here is that we are intuitive beings fundamentally. We're rational, but we're really much more intuitive. And although he was talking about consumers, I think he was essentially talking about humans and typical human behaviours. We're all subject to those biases, preferences, habits. We're strongly subject to peer pressure and social pressure. We take shortcuts, we forget things, we get easily distracted. It's just all about normally, being a everyday human being. And this is the challenge that we're dealing with as L&D professionals when we're trying to influence behavior. So it's all very well telling people what they should do, giving them very clear instructions, maybe giving them a great learning intervention. But if we don't take into account the other things that influence behavior, then we're not likely to get much change and we're not likely to get much impact. So at Acteon, we embrace this. We take a behaviour approach and we try and help our clients use their communication and their learning interventions to shape those moments that matter, those key moments of behaviour choice, which actually make a difference to outcomes. And that's really where we want to put the focus today. I'm going to start by exploring that in a bit more detail and thinking about behaviour choices in the moment by using a little scenario. So we'd like to you to come with us on a little journey. We'd like you to let yourself go, put yourself in the position of the person on this journey that we're going through. We're going to throw up some behaviour choices for you to think about, decisions for you to make, and we'd like you to share with us what you would do, and we'll see what the group would choose. Okay, so I want you to imagine that you're meeting a work contact for a working lunch. So it's exciting. You can actually, you know, it's post-pandemic. You can go out, you can meet someone. This is someone you have met online, but you haven't met them face-to-face before. And you're going to discuss a work issue where there's an opportunity for some fruitful collaboration. So off you go. You've booked at this rather nice restaurant for lunch. You turn up on time. When you get to the door of the restaurant, there's a clear sign saying, please wear a mask. Okay, so you've got your mask with you, so that's not a problem. You've seen the sign. But when you look through the window of the restaurant, you can see that absolutely nobody in there is wearing a mask. So none of the customers, and you can't actually see any staff wearing a mask either. And you also see through the window that or as far as you can tell, your contact hasn't arrived yet. So you can't sort of see what they would be doing. So this is the first choice. You're about to enter the restaurant. Are you going to put your face mask on? So just think about it quickly. Sarah, if you can pop up the poll, we're going to do a quick yes, no poll. Don't overthink it. Just based on that information, what would you do? Would you put your face mask on or not? Okay, so you can quickly put your answer in and then let's have a look. Okay, thank you very much for getting the answers in now. There's a bit of movement. Let's have a look. Okay, that's interesting. So we do probably just about got everyone in, maybe a few more to come. That's interesting. Okay, so we've actually got a majority for yes. So nearly 70 of you, 70 are going to comply, be compliant, and you're going to put the mask on, like the sign says. But quite a significant group, even though that clear instruction is signed there that please put your face mask on, and even though you've got a mask with you, so actually in this case you won't do this. Okay, well this is just a scenario quickly for an example as a test case, but we'll move on. So you go into the restaurant, face mask on or not. Okay, it's a very nice restaurant, very smart. Don't worry, your contact is paying, so that's fine. And as you're settling in, your contact arrives and the waiting staff come and they give you a menu, and you see when it arrives that this place really is very classy because the menu is entirely in French. Okay, so you look up, you see your contact is looking a little bit sheepish themselves, like they're struggling with it. So what are you going to do? Are you going to translate the menu for them or offer to translate the menu for them? So assume the level of French reading capability that you actually have. In the moment, what are you going to decide to do? Will you translate the menu for them? Okay, so again, let's have the poll up there. Are you going to offer to translate the menu? Okay, so looks like we've got quite a number of French speakers there. Oh, it's very impressive. Actually, that's very good. Yeah, fantastic. So most of us are confident that we've got that's very good. And slightly unexpected, I'm definitely in the 10%. I'd love to be able to translate that menu, but I would probably make a real botched effort of it. So okay, that's good. So far we've been able to help our colleague out. That's fantastic. So we're translating the menu. Okay, so the meal gets underway. It's all going very pleasantly. You have a good interaction. You translated the menu successfully, so you get what you thought you were getting when the order comes. But while you're having the meal, it's all going smooth. But you notice after a while on another table, there's a bit of a dispute breaking out between one of the diners and one of the waiting staff, and this gradually escalates. And it escalates to the point where you pretty clearly hear that diner use a very offensive and probably racist term directed at that member of the waiting staff. Okay. And the member of the waiting staff just walks off kind of disconsolate. They leave it there. So in the moment, are you going to challenge that offensive comment? Are you going to raise it with that diner directly right there? So again, try to put yourself in that situation. I know it's very artificial, but just thinking about it, are you going to challenge them? Okay, so we're looking, great, thank you all for jumping in and voting very quickly. So we're looking at about 50-50, aren't we? Interesting, yeah, yes, no. And I think this is a really interesting one. We all know about the kind of challenges of these social situations. If I'm being completely honest, I think I'm probably a no in this situation. You know, I know it's wrong, but I would find it hard to be the first. I'd be really, really hoping somebody else was going to do it, and then I could jump in and back them up. But being that first person could be really challenging, even though I know I should, because it's clearly inappropriate. But so that's really interesting. So we've got about a 50-50 split on that one. Okay, great. So meal's going well. You've had a great time, successful interaction. You've planned your next step with your colleague, and so it's time to finish the meal, and you leave the restaurant. Okay, and as you walk away from the restaurant, are you going to report the restaurant to food standards? Okay, so again, based on the information that you have so far, this is your next choice. Should you report the restaurant to food standards? Okay, so let's just see. Okay, so we've got quite strong no, or a few people are, so they're obviously not happy with what's in. Let's have a look. So we've got strong, okay, yeah, so pretty strong no, obviously. And the question you're asking is why? Why would you do this? Why would you be reporting this restaurant to food standards? Quite rightly so. Yeah, why would you do that? There's no particular reason, is there? But actually, this restaurant should be reported to food standards because they have a really serious pest problem. So they've got ant infestation, they've got problems with rodents throughout, and generally they've got some very unpleasant things hiding in the dark. So actually unfortunately, food was great, atmosphere really nice, but actually there's a real pest problem there. But of course, you didn't know that. Based on the information that you had, you didn't have the chance to make that decision to report them to food standards. Okay, clearly in that situation. Okay, so thank you for participating in our very contrived scenario. The purpose of which, I guess, was just to bring home that idea to all of us that there can be situations for us all where objectively there are what might be considered correct choices. So clearly, there's a sign that clearly says, please wear a mask. There's a menu, you'd obviously try to translate that for somebody if you could. You should clearly challenge that unpleasant and racist behaviour, and the restaurant should be reported to food standards for its pest problem. So there are objectively correct choices, but of course, as we've seen, the real behaviour choices are more complicated than that for us. So we're not necessarily going to make those correct choices in the moment. There's all sorts of human influences and factors that come into that. Okay, so we may know what we should do. We may not even know what we should do. It depends on the information that we've got. But even when we do know what we should do, powerful influences in the moment determine what we actually do. Okay, so, and remember, it is those things that we actually do in the moment that are what are driving the performance of the organization. So we can translate those slightly fatuous choices from our restaurant scenario, but it's still true of everyday situations. In the workplace, people making decisions are subject to those social pressures, time pressures, lack of information, and all of those things still apply. So how can we shape those moments that matter? How can we use the things that we're doing, whether that's we're working learning and development, whether we're using communication materials, the channels that we have to communicate with colleagues, how can we use those to shape those moments to try and help people make the positive behavior choices that we need? Okay, so the first thing we're going to focus on, which is, I think in a certain sort of common understanding, perhaps for L&D professionals, is we need to first focus on identifying what are the moments that matter. What are those key moments when what someone does actually makes a difference to the outcomes that we're interested in? So let's just think about that for a second, and think about it in this sort of bog standard example, a behaviour need that every organisation wrestles with. So fire safety, okay, so classic for L&D professionals, fire safety training, fire safety awareness. Why is the organisation doing this? To try and keep people safe and premises safe. What are the moments that actually matter for most colleagues in terms of fire safety? So if you can have a think about that and perhaps pop some ideas into chat. Okay, so you think about the majority of colleagues in an organisation, not specific fire marshals or people like that, but or the director of health and safety or whatever, everyday run-of-the-mill colleagues in most workplaces. What are the kinds of things that they can do, the behaviours that they can choose, which actually help to keep the organisation safe with regard to fire safety? So if you've got any thoughts on that, yes, exactly that thing. So awareness, where's the nearest? What am I going to do in an evacuation? Being able to follow procedures, that's right. But I guess to look for hazards, yeah. So being active, identifying hazards in the workplace. Yeah, hazards and risks, so not blocking fire exits. What about positive things that they need to do? So certainly there's a not blocking a fire exit routes, being aware of things like exit routes. Yeah. Knowing how to use a fire extinguisher, potentially, that could be an important moment. Taking part in, I think Harry thinks, I think that's fire drills, how to raise the alarm. That's a classic, very specific behaviour in the moment. Yeah. Participating in fire drills. Okay, so we're getting these moments that matter. But this is a really important way to think about moments that matter. And I think we've captured some of these things here. So we would say things like knowing what to do if you discover a fire. What happens if you're the person who finds a fire in the waste bin in that office that isn't being used? Knowing what to do when you hear the fire alarm. What are the actions you're actually expected to take? Knowing what to do in an evacuation procedure, for yourself, or are you supposed to help other people? Those key moments that matter. And if you can influence positive behaviours in that situation, you will have a huge effect on the overall safety of the people and the premises in the organisation. And yet still, what you see in lots of fire safety training are things like the role of the HSE in ensuring fire safety, the number of fire safety casualties in different sorts of environments. Now, all that stuff, it's not irrelevant and it might be background, but it's not really helpful in the moment that matters. So taking that focus and thinking about moments that matter is the starting point for shaping those moments for more positive outcomes. If we take a less perhaps immediate one, induction and onboarding, again, a classic area where learning and development professionals are trying to have a big impact. Here's someone clearly enthusiastically heading towards their first day in a new job. What are the kind of moments that really matter for a new joiner? And as part of that onboarding and new joining, yeah, the welcome you get at the reception, absolutely. What a classic moment that's going to have a big impact on how you feel on your first day. Yeah, does your IT work when you get to the computer? Again, the first time you log in, is there a welcome message? Clearly, people who've perhaps experienced technology problems when they've joined your companies, that's coming straight. Where are the toilets? Absolutely. So where the facilities are. Having someone to greet you, absolutely. Who's meeting you? Who's giving you that sort of warm welcome? Things that are small moments that have a big impact. Where to go for lunch? Yeah, so sort of being looked after, really. An open door mentality, that's really interesting. So that's actually about actions that existing colleagues need to take. So that's how they influence the moments that matter. Okay, so again, I think, and we could boil a lot of these things down, perhaps in the case of to a new joiner, a moment that matters is what happens when I have a question. Do I get a thoughtful and helpful response, or do I just get passed over? And the other one that came out in a lot of those things, like at reception and how you get greeted, those moments when you meet, are you introduced personally to new colleagues? And do they respond in kind? So those, we all know, those small moments make a huge difference. And they probably make much more difference than having some vast and glossy induction pack full of information that you're also given as well. So Okay, two quite simplistic examples, but really focusing in on what are the moments that matter, that actually make a difference to the outcome that someone experiences. So we need to focus in on those moments that matter. And then we need to think, and once we understand those moments, we can start to think about how do we shape them to give the positive outcomes that we're seeking, that we need to achieve. How do we help people make the positive behaviour choices in those moments? So let's just quickly revisit our scenario. So in the example of the face covering, just share and chat, what do you think was influencing your choice in this case? So whether you felt it was right, so you looked in, nobody else was wearing a mask, maybe you decided that you didn't mind that and you were quite happy to be the only one wearing a mask going into the restaurant. Maybe so what kinds of things were influencing the way that you answered that question? Okay, so yeah, peer pressure, actually that's a really good point. Your own safety, so absolutely having a regard for your own safety. Understanding, so there's this kind of capability there, having an understanding of why we do this, how you feel about other people, about protecting others, not just yourself. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to suggest that in this situation, no one's wearing a mask, so it mustn't be important to other staff or customers. Yeah, that's interesting. What I'm going to suggest is that most of the things influencing this were about how you felt about the situation. It's quite right. I think Harriet points out, you need understanding. You have to understand why you would even be being asked to do this. You have to be carrying a mask. That's another criteria that's going to be important in driving what you choose. But mostly, I think it's fair to say, and I think it's coming out in the responses, what we're talking about here is how you feel about the situation and how you feel about yourself and how you feel about the other people there. So we're going to summarize that as saying it's about motivation in this case. Okay, so how motivated, all of those things come together, they influence how you feel, and that's really your motivation in the end to make that choice or not. If we think about translating the menu, okay, so again, what were the motivators here? Or what were the agents driving your change? What were the things that determined whether? Now, to me, with this one, personally speaking, there's a fairly fundamental driver, or in this case for me, barrier, which is ability. I can't read French well enough to confidently translate that menu to somebody else. Nice motivation there, breaking down a barrier with a colleague, to help your colleague. So there are strong motivators to do it. I think we would probably all be motivated to do it. But I think for lots of people, what might be a key driver here is capability. So if you don't have the capability, you can't even get to the stage of motivation. So if you just can't really understand the menu, you're not able to translate it, then really whether you want to help your colleague is kind of is possibly not relevant. Okay, so this is perhaps an area where capability is key. You need to have that capability in order to even contemplate taking the action. Okay, and our third example, we'll skip over the offensive comment, but go to that reporting to food standards. So here was an odd one, and this is perhaps quite difficult to articulate, but in this case, what do we think might have been the factors contributing to your decision? So for almost everybody, the decision was not to report to food standards. So why was that? Why did you make that choice rather than making the report? Exactly, lack of knowledge. So exactly, yeah, the knowledge problem. You didn't know there was a problem. You didn't know, of course. Okay, so it's a pretty simplistic answer, but it actually illustrates something really important when we're thinking about shaping the moments that matter. And the way we would characterize this is, so you didn't have the opportunity, you didn't have the chance to do it because you didn't have knowledge. So if you didn't see anything, no one told you, you had no awareness. So the opportunity to make that positive behavior choice didn't even arise. Okay, so what we've talked about here are three really important drivers of behavior in the moment. And we can characterize these, as we've said, as motivation. It's how do I feel about it? I want to do it. So if I'm going to take this action, I've got to want to do it. I might because it really matters to me. I care about it personally. It might because there's a financial incentive. It might because I know it's going to be good for somebody else. But for whatever reason, I have the motivation. Capability is I know what to do. Okay, so maybe I've had the training. Maybe it's something simple. I just instinctively know what to do. So obviously, in the mask example, we all most know why we might be asked to wear a mask, and we know how to put it on. So capability is not really an issue. But in some cases, I would argue, like translating the menu in French, capability is a big issue because it's going to be a real barrier if you don't have it. Okay, so motivation and capability are two crucial drivers, and they're about me as the person who's going to use the behavior. The third crucial driver is opportunity. Did I have the chance to do it? And opportunity is really often about the environment. It's about the situation in which you find yourself, the situation in which the behavior is going to take place. And it can seem an odd one, but I think it's really critical in terms of influencing behavior and getting positive outcomes. And it's often overlooked when we're using learning interventions of all sorts. So, for example, you might see a sign that says, please sanitize your hands before you enter these premises. Great, easy. You definitely want to do that. It's obviously sensible to do. You want to do it for your own safety. You want to do it for other people's safety. You have capability. You understand exactly why you should be doing that. But if there's no hand sanitizer, you can't do it. Okay, so an opportunity gaps and challenges can come in other ways too. For example, a classic thing that probably maybe some of you experienced is you're going to get some training in a new system, a new IT system. You take the training online. It's a good course. It's really effective. It's really informative. But then the system isn't being rolled out for another 3 months. So you don't have the opportunity to practice that behavior, to use that behavior. Okay? You don't have the chance. So opportunity is often overlooked, I think, in its significance for why, when it is that we maybe make a learning intervention, we don't get the outcomes that we think. And it's a really important behavior choices in the moments that matter. So we really think about these things when we're working with clients, when we've identified moments that matters. We think for the people who are in those situations, who are about to make those choices, what is influencing them in terms of motivation, capability, and opportunity? And just to illustrate how those things can sometimes be different and where you need to target resources. If you think about lots of sort of compliance training examples, we touched on fire safety, maybe data protection, things like that. Often the capability for most colleagues is very, very simple. It's not difficult. It might be, close the door on a room that if you discover a fire and raise the alarm. It might be, move to the nearest evacuation muster point if you hear the fire alarm. So the capability is often quite simple. So we don't need to put lots of resource on that. Usually or frequently, a challenge with compliance type issues is motivation. It's getting people to think about it, to engage with it, to actually want to use those behaviors and be ready to use those behaviors when they need to. So motivation can be a bigger driver there. And if we understand that, we can make our interventions more effective at building motivation. Similarly, imagine you're introducing a new system. It's a very simple online system where instead of it taking 3 weeks to process everybody's expenses, they'll be processed and paid within 24 hours. Okay, but it is a new system. It's not difficult, but it's completely new. If you're thinking about how to introduce that system, then your targeting of resources might look a bit more something like this. You'd expect motivation to be high. Everybody is going to want to use this system because it means they get their expenses paid in 24 hours rather than 3 weeks. Okay, if you can make the system easily available on devices which people are using, then probably the opportunity to use it is going to be high. So you don't need to, that's not really where the resources need to be targeted. But of course, it's a completely new system. Nobody knows how to use it yet. So capability is going to be the issue in this case. Again, it's quite a simplistic look at these things, but this is we're trying to just give you some flavor of how thinking in terms of these 3 drivers, acting in the moments that matter, can help you be more efficient, more effective in where you're targeting the resources that you're using when you're trying to influence behavior. And similarly, the other important thing is that they target maybe the types of tools and resources that you use. So if you think about motivation, okay, it's much more about speaking to the person and trying to engage them, and maybe trying to align what you need them to do with things that matter to themselves. So within motivation, you might be using more of things like surprise and humor to grab people's attention and engage them, like when we made a Barry White music video to do health and safety training at Channel 4, or when we to try and help people engage with ideas around data privacy and protection, we use the analogy of a baby coming into work and being looked after at work for ITV. It might be about creating a strong identity that binds your messages to things that matter to people. It might be about using peer contributions from colleagues or from customers or beneficiaries of this particular behaviour or this service that help to speak to people, that help to touch emotions and engage people with what you're trying to communicate to them. If the focus is more on capability, then yes, this is where perhaps we're more established as L&D professionals. So yes, it's maybe about using digital learning might be a good way to go. But again, putting that into formats and platforms that people can actually engage with and use. It might be about thinking, well, does this learning need to be presented at the point of need? So, for example, things like QR codes are really coming through there to actually place learning resources and interventions at the point of need. This might be where you actually really need people to practice a skill in a safe environment. So you're doing things like simulations, for example, the classic sort of resuscitation simulations, maybe role plays as well, and that sort of thing. So thinking about effective tools for building capability. And then finally, just thinking about opportunity. How are you promoting opportunity and driving opportunity? So this often is about putting nudges and prompts and reminders out into the workspace and the work environment to create the opportunity for people to use those behaviours when they might not otherwise be thinking about it. So yeah, this might be about posters. It might be about stickers placed on key pieces of equipment at the right time. Music is very effective for this, for helping sort of keep things in the front of people's minds. So if you have music playing in internal environments, maybe creating a playlist with tracks which are linked to the kind of messages that you'll want to get across, or the kind of behavior that you want to prompt. The other really, really interesting tools and tactics around opportunities come in terms of actually potentially redesigning processes and procedures, redesigning the environment to basically make the behaviors you want much more likely, much more probable. And that's a really interesting area in itself. So anyway, this is just to give some indication of the reasons that we place this emphasis on behaviors in the moments that matter, because we think it helps focus and target interventions to make them much more likely to result in the behaviors that you're trying to achieve. And the advantage of this really is, we think there's the advantages to building this insight up front about what is driving behaviors in the moments that matter can then make you much more efficient and effective in the resources they use. So we sometimes think about it in this way, this might be a typical engagement for us on a project where we're supporting an L&D department, and maybe this, for internal projects as well. You recognise some of this, so you build some insight. You think, well, what sort of intervention do we need? Maybe it's a learning program or something like that. And then a lot of the resource goes on what we would call the crafting stage. It goes on building that, the instructional design, the development, so on, really trying to get that absolutely right. And then you put it in place, and hopefully you do some evaluation. So you see how people are getting on with it and how effective it's been. But what we are working with colleagues to do when thinking about the shaping the moments that matter is you spend a bit more time building that insight, really at what's actually going on in the moments that matter. Why are people using the behaviors that they are? And how can we influence that to get more of the positive behaviors that we need? And once you have that insight, potentially you can spend less time on crafting and building things, because the things that you build are more targeted, more effective. And then what we also encourage clients to work with is evaluation as part of the process. So you're constantly looking at your interventions and saying, are we achieving the impact that we want? How could we tweak this? How could we make this more effective? And you keep going through that cycle of insight building, crafting targeted resources, evaluating them, and then developing them. And all of that, we think, results in more agility, more impact, and better value for the resources that you're putting in to try to influence people's behaviours, to ultimately influence those positive impacts that you seek. Great, so that's the kind of, I guess, an overview of the behavioural approach that we take and why we think that's got particular value. It's time to make that a lot more real and a lot more practical. So I'm going to hand over to Rebecca to talk about a really exciting case study for us that we worked on with Co-op, using this approach of really looking at moments that matter and thinking, how can we most effectively influence these for positive outcomes? So thanks, Rebecca. Take it away.
Thanks, Owen. Yes, and hello, special hello to the Co-op contacts, I think, on this webinar. So just want to say thank you for letting us tell this story. So Co-op, just for people who don't know, I'm sure everyone in the UK knows who Co-op are. They're a huge retailer in the UK. They've been around for nearly 200 years, and we're lucky enough to do lots of work with Co-op, actually. And they're a great organisation. They're all about cooperating for a fairer world, which means they create value for their members and the communities that they serve. And in 2020, they needed to implement a new cash management system called Smart Cash. It's a major investment, but it needed significant process and system and behaviour change. So we worked with them to identify and shape the key moments in this big strategic transformation. So let's tell you a bit about the project itself. So Smart Cash, it's a very clever one-touch cash management, cash handling and counting system. So it basically goes from when a customer hands over a note in the store, that's the only touch, and then it goes through the Smart Cash system right the way through the banking. So everything's done sort of by a virtual system, really, and a very smart computer system. And it's a positive change, actually, because it's making Co-op stores and making colleagues much more secure, saving managers time, but it did need a lot of new behaviours and a lot of new habits, as well as new IT, tech, hardware, software. And there's some additional challenges, I suppose, because it was during COVID, the first lockdown in 2020, and the rollout was due to take place from, I think, April 2020 all the way through to May 21. So it was a long kind of implementation. And they did a very wisely, actually did a pilot with a few stores right at the start to see how people were reacting to the new system. And despite plenty of instructions, lots actually went wrong. And it's really interesting because the instructions were very clear, but there were some of these specific challenges. So not putting cash in the till drawer. If you work in a Co-op store, you've been used to just taking that £10 note or £20 note, just putting it in the till while you're talking to the customer. So it was a very ingrained behaviour, really, that we were asking people to change. And these small errors had a huge impact when you scaled it up, because obviously nearly 3,000 stores, you can imagine if things go wrong in that moment, then the impact is huge for the organisation. Co-op also knew that about 20% of their colleagues were just not confident with new technology. We all know that new systems can be very daunting, so they were really aware of that. And also the tech team, so the kind of hardware installation people, they'd said that face-to-face with other clients, face-to-face had been really good, because face-to-face training had helped reassure people, they could ask questions. But of course, for Co-op, during this sort of COVID era, it just meant that colleague protection was key, and face-to-face training was just really not possible. And the other thing to mention was the pace of change at the Co-op. Everything's happening. There's lots of, I think, about 15 to 20 change projects running at any point. So Co-op asked us to look at it with a behavioural lens, and just like Owen's been talking about, we knew there was lots of change going on, but we wanted to work with Co-op to find out which moments had the biggest impact when scaled up. So you know, colleagues needed to simply put, I think 95% of the notes that they handled into the cash box, into the smart cash box, one transaction at a time. That was it. It was, you know, it was a really simple behaviour in theory, but it did mean interrupting their existing pattern of behaviour. And for managers as well, there were some really key points in the system in that process that had a massive impact if missed. So I think someone said at the start of the project, one of the co-op team said that they handle about 5 billion cash post transactions every year. So you can just imagine that you know, the scale is huge. So we wanted to create this blend of learning and comms to support managers and remind colleagues of specific actions at key moments. We also knew there were key moments in terms of the time frame as well. So things like the first time they heard about the system, the first time, the day of installation in store. That's also the first time managers did their banking, did their reconciliations. There were lots of these key moments. We really honed in and agreed the moments with the team. So if we go on to the next screen, but Chris Whitty, next slide, thank you. Overall, really the approach was we wanted to build capability and increase motivation. So we wanted to do something that stood out and attracted attention. And we know from past projects and from other projects with clients that people are programmed to react to music. So the way we kind of got attention on this project was to write our own song with the co-op team about the behaviour of putting the notes into the groove. And that came from one of an early discussion actually with the co-op team. You know, saying, you know, it's quite straightforward. You just have to put the note into the groove. And we were like, oh, okay. I wonder whether that's a creative idea we can use. And sure enough, we wrote this sound-alike song. It had its own words. It's talked about the benefits of the system, but it gave us a really clear brand identity. It had this hook, this memorable way of cutting through what else was going on for people, obviously in this really busy operational time. So once we got people's attention, if we go to the next slide, actually, thank you. Once we got people's attention, we wanted to create materials that focused on those most important actions that we'd kind of identified. So we did some online learning, lots of scenarios, but we chunked that learning into really digestible chunks to make sure we didn't overload people. And we made sure it was all focused on those really key actions. And we had things in the learning for managers like red flags, where we knew that a small error would have a massive impact in the wider implementation. So we made sure we focused on red flags. We worked with Co-op's L&D team. Actually, we worked with them quite a lot. They, we shared graphics and shared assets and ideas, and we worked in a very collaborative way with them and made sure that the different variants of the modules were really giving each individual role what they needed to make the right decision in the moment. But we knew we couldn't just provide online learning and expect people to do the right thing. If you go on to the next one, Owen, the basic, I mean, the pilot showed that behaviour is really complex, and no matter how easy you think the basics are, it's often not. And as we know, behaviour is influenced in many ways. So we created a suite of resources that were really built to help support the most important moments. So we had, you can see there, we've got checklists. We gave managers checklists for really crucial processes. We had in-depth guides for really detailed information, but they're searchable and easy to find when they had a question. And there were some capability gaps. Obviously, any new system, people didn't know how to use the system. So there were these capability gaps, but there were opportunity gaps too. And that's just because how busy they are operationally in the co-op, retail generally. So we looked at ways of nudging behaviour as well. So reminding people to do the right thing in the moment. And in that design phase, we'd identified these critical actions, basically like pressing buttons to commit funds for banking and certain things. So we created stickers like the confirm your banking sticker that was going on there, like on safes and other stickers that are around to really focus people's attention and remind them to do the right thing in the right moment. And I think colleagues at Co-op even organised the original Into the Groove Madonna song to be playing on the radio, just as like a little subliminal nudge for people as well. and it was fun, it wasn't, if we go on to the next one, it wasn't just about digital learning and digital resources, it was about people as well. So, Co-op are essentially a people business, lots of learning and comms delivered through the LMS and the comms challenges, but it's all about communities. That's what, Co-op is very much a community focused retailer. And colleagues want to see and hear from people like them, not just central teams pushing content out. So it's not a broadcast activity. We know they trust peers and leaders, so we made sure they had we had social learning content to really influence those key moments like installation or the first time at banking. So that social content reassured and supported people in those tricky times. We had things like looping GIFs from the songs we used on Yammer. Yammer was, I think, at one point the second most used group on the Smart Cash Yammer group was like the second biggest in Co-op, which is fantastic. And that social aspect really helped with motivation. I can see why it's important. I can make time to get it right. So the online networks worked really well, but Co-op did want to provide that human aspect as well. They couldn't do face-to-face, obviously, but what they used for this network of change agents, they call stores of excellence. They were their on-the-ground experts. And although you couldn't do face-to-face, Co-op made sure that they had these support sessions, so Teams calls, surgeries, again from peers, not central teams. And the great advantage of these regular conversations that it was enabling continuous evaluation of the materials that we were using and we were shaping. So the rollout started out with about 100 stores, then 200, then 400, and that implementation grew. And we were testing and learning all the way through. And people were telling us actually we do need, for example, I think there was a co-ops with post offices in had a slightly different process, so we ended up creating a slightly different variant for them. So that kind of continuous evaluation from these real networks, these real agents of change was really helpful. So how did we do? Should we have a look? The Co-op team were really delighted with the results. So by the end of the rollout period, they'd reached so many, 2,600 stores, reached loads of colleagues. The completion rates on the LMSs were high, so everyone's happy about that. Stores felt really supported. The campaign was a success. We could see that the resources were being used, and we were, they could see that there was really high engagement for the change. And the anecdotal feedback has been great as well. I know Co-op's been really pleased with some of the things people have been saying. The store managers were they loved that mix, I think, of that human and technological delivery, really. So you're getting things like checklists and online learning, but you're also getting that community support as well. So fantastic feedback, and that the creativity of the blend, I think, was really helpful in sort of maintaining that attention all the way through. So if we just go to see, I suppose my reflection of the project, listening to Owen talk earlier and reminding ourselves of those key moments, I think it's that small behaviours leading to the big business impact. So this is 95% reduction in forgeries since they've implemented Smart Cash, which is fantastic. But that is lots of Co-op colleagues doing the right thing in the moment. And I know that they had another big, there's one more statistic as well, which is really impressive. Again, that massive impact in terms of the reduction in cash loss as well. And I think it's that, it's the blend, isn't it? From songs, stickers, checklists, looping GIFs, surgeries, whatever. It's all those things that come together to influence and nudge behaviour in different ways, all pushing towards that same aim of driving that big organisational change. That's it for me.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's fantastic. Yeah. So I mean, it's a really powerful story. The Smart Cash story at Co-op is actually shortlisted for Learning Technologies Award, which we will find out all about tomorrow night at the awards ceremony. But it's a really great example, I think, of a major change program for Co-op, where they had tried a pilot project, as Rebecca said, which had uncovered some really sort of surprising challenges around behaviour. I mean, I think there was a quote from the project team well, Rebecca, I think where they said they were really surprised at the ways that people had been able to get this wrong. And actually, when we looked at that with them, and I think people were getting it wrong in all of those sorts of human ways that actually, you could say with hindsight, you might expect. It's about adjusting to new change. It's about trying to unlearn really ingrained habits in the way that you do things. So by taking that focus of looking at the moments that matter, understanding what are the really significant moments for the implementation of the system, and then providing support to target motivation, capability, and opportunity in those moments, we were able to help Co-op achieve really fantastic results and actually ultimately drive a very successful implementation of the new cash system. So we really hope that's been of interest. Essentially, our focus is that, and the core point is that it's these behaviour choices in the moments that matter are what's driving the performance of your organisation. And here we are as L&D professionals and people in the business of learning and communication. We're trying to influence those. We're trying to help people make those positive choices, do the things that make them and their organisations more successful. And we can do that more effectively when we think about the things that shape behavior in the moments that matter. So capability, motivation, and opportunity. And when we have that understanding, we can target our resources more efficiently, more effectively, and drive greater impact. And I hope that case study was a real practical example of the kind of effect that can have. So we hope that was of interest. We appreciate it was a quick run through something which is really quite a complex area, but we hope it stimulated some thought. We'd love to talk to you more about it, and to facilitate that, what we'd like to offer to all the participants in this webinar today is actually an hour of Acteon consultancy time for free to help you maybe think about this in the context of your organisation, perhaps to target and shape some moments that matter with a business requirement that you're currently targeting. So if you think that would be interesting, if you'd like to carry on the conversation, we have a limited number of these opportunities available. So please do get in touch with Sarah. Her email is there at the bottom, and we will set you up and would be delighted to talk further with you. So thanks very much, Rebecca, for telling us about Smart Cash at Co-op. Thank you all for joining in today. That's great. We're going to stay online. If there are questions coming in through chat, please do share them with us. But it's been great to have your company, and I hope that was a useful hour for you. Thanks very much. Great. So Sarah, I don't know if there were any particular.
No particular questions coming up. If anyone's got any questions for us, feel free to pop them in the chat. I
did notice someone say, Sue said it missed the beginning of the webinar, and certainly the recording will be available. Sarah, can you just remind me of how we're making that available?
Yeah, we'll be sending out a follow-up email either later today or tomorrow.
Great.
With the link to that, yeah.
Thanks very much. And thanks again, everyone, for joining in.